God says, woman, I'm opening a door only a queen can walk through. And I need you to hear this not with your ears, but with your spirit, because this is not a casual invitation, and it is not a message meant for everyone who happens to be listening. This is a summons. This is a moment that has been building quietly behind the scenes of your life. Even in seasons where you thought nothing was moving, even in nights where you cried and wondered if heaven had forgotten your address. God says he has been watching the way you carried yourself when no one clapped for you, the way you stayed faithful when you were misunderstood, the way you kept loving even when love cost you more than you ever expected to pay. And now he says the door in front of you is not an ordinary door, because ordinary doors are crowded, noisy, and easy to access. This door requires posture, identity, and authority. Only a queen can walk through it, because only a queen knows how to stand without shrinking and bow without losing herself. God says you have mistaken your preparation for delay. You thought the waiting meant denial, but the waiting was refinement. You thought the silence meant abandonment, but the silence was strategy. Heaven was shaping your voice so that when you speak on the other side of this door, your words carry weight. God says there were battles you were not allowed to fight because you were being trained to rule, not to brawl. Queens don't argue in every room. Queens discern which doors deserve their presence. And now God says the reason some relationships fell apart, the reason certain plans collapsed, the reason you were forced to start over is because those things could not fit through the door he is opening for you. God says, woman, I have watched you survive rooms that were never designed to celebrate you. I have seen you adapt when you shout. LD have been honored. I've seen you dim your light so others could feel comfortable, and I've seen you apologize for strengths I placed inside you on purpose. But this door does not open to apology. This door opens to authority. This door opens to women who know who they are even when their hands are shaking. God says you don't need permission from people who never carried your burden. You don. It need validation from those who benefited from your silence. You are walking into a space where your presence will answer questions before you ever open your mouth. God says the enemy tried to confuse you by attacking your identity first. That's why the warfare was emotional before it was external. That's why your confidence was targeted before your resources. That's why the attack came through. Words, rejection, comparison, and betrayal. But queens are not born in comfort. They are revealed in pressure. God says every tear you cried watered the ground you were about to step on. Every prayer you whispered when you were too tired to shout built the key you are now holding. And this door is opening not because you begged for it, but because you became ready for what's behind it. God says, yo, are not walking into something small. This is not a minor upgrade. This is not a slight improvement. This is a shift in territory. The door leads to influence, to responsibility, to visibility you once prayed for and then got scared of when it got close. God says, I had to heal you before I elevated you, because unhealed queens bleed on kingdoms they are called to build. I had to teach you discern. Meant so you would know who can walk beside you and who must stay behind. And yes, it hurt to let go, but it would have hurt more to carry the wrong people into the right place. God says the reason this door is only for a queen is because behind it are conversations you were not ready for before. Behind it are decisions that will affect more than just you. Behind it are assignments that require wisdom, restraint, and courage. God says you are about to be trusted with influence, and influence reveals character faster than struggle ever could. That's why I taught you how to sit alone without becoming bitter. That's why I taught you how to celebrate others while waiting for your turn. That's why I taught you how to pray instead of panic. God says some people will not recognize you on the OT side of this door, and that's okay. Queens are not understood by everyone. They are recognized by those with vision. You don't owe everyone access to the new version of you. You don't have to explain your growth to people committed to misunderstanding you. God says walk through the door with grace, not guilt. You are not leaving people behind. You are answering a call ahead. God says this too will require you to stand taller than you ever have, even on days when you feel small inside. It will require you to speak clearly even when your voice trembles. It will require you to trust me more than your own understanding, because what I am about to do through you will not always make sense in the natural. But queens don't move by consensus, they move by conviction. And God says, I have said my conviction in your spirit. God says you have been rehearsing this moment in your prayers without realizing it. Every time you asked me to use you, every time you asked me to expand you, every time you asked me to do something new, this door responded. Now it stands open, not because you are perfect, but because you are positioned. God says you don't need to wait until you feel ready. Queen, rarely feel ready, they feel called. And calling carries you when confidence tries to run out. God says there will be resistance as you approach this door, not because you are wrong, but because you are close. The closer you get to purpose, the louder the distractions become. The closer you get to destiny, the more familiar fear will sound. But remember, fear speaks the language of limitation, and I speak the language of authority. God says, choose which voice you will follow as you step forward. God says, I am opening doors that no one can shut, but I will not drag you through them. Queens choose to walk. Queens choose to rise. Queens choose to believe me, even when the path feels unfamiliar. And as you place your hand on this door, God says, let go of the version of you that survived and step into the version of you that reigns. Survival taught you endurance, but reigning will require trust. God says the atmosphere will change when you walk in. Conversations will shift. Opportunities will locate you. Favor will speak on your behalf, but so will responsibility. God says, do not romanticize the crown without respecting the weight it carries. Queens serve before they are celebrated. Queens listen before they lead. Queens kneel before they stand. And God says, I have taught you how to kneel in secret so you can stand in public without losing me. God says, you are not late. You are not behind. You are right on time. Heaven's calendar does not move by pressure. It moves by purpose. And everything you went through aligned you for this moment. God says, even your mistakes were ready, med as lessons. Even your detours taught you discernment. Even your heartbreak sharpened your empathy. You are walking into this door wiser, stronger, and more grounded than you realize. God says some will try to label you as changed, distant, or different. Let them. Queens are not called to be familiar. They are called to be faithful. You are allowed to evolve. You are allowed to outgrow rooms hat once felt like home. God says, I am not asking you to abandon who you are. I'm asking you to become who I called you to be. God says, as you step closer, don't rush. Walk with intention. Carry yourself with honor. Let your posture preach before your mouth does. You don't have to announce your arrival. The oil on your life will do that for you. And as you cross the threshold, God says, remember who opened the door. Remember who kept you when you were tired. Remember who spoke to you when no one else understood. Stay humble. Stay listening. Stay anchored. God says this door leads to rooms where your prayers will be answered in ways you didn't expect. Some answers will look like blessings. Others will look like instructions. Some will feel like joy. Others like stretching. But every answer will be intentional. God says, I am not elevating you to impress you. I am elevating you to impact others through you. God says, woman, this is not the time to second guess yourself. This is not the time to replay old failures. This is not the time to ask, who will approve? This is the time to remember who appointed you. I appointed you before you were confident. I chose you before you were ready. I called you before you were seen. And now the door responds to the identity you finally accepted. God says, take one more step forward. Leave fear at the threshold. Leave shame behind you. Leave the need to be understood outside. Where you are going, you will be recognized, not explained. Where you are going, your obedience will speak louder than your history. Where you are going, your past will not disqualify you, it will testify. God says you're about to discover that everything you endured was training for this level. Every lonely night, every silent season, every unanswered text, every closed door prepared you to walk through this one with wisdom instead of desperation. And as your hand touches the door, God says, feel the weight of who you have become, because queens do not rush in. O rooms unsure of their worth, they enter knowing they belong, knowing they were invited, knowing the path beneath their feet was prepared long before they ever arrived, and knowing that what awaits on the other side is not just a blessing for them alone, but an assignment that will require them to stay soft in heart while standing firm in spirit, to remain prayerful even as influence increases, to remember that crowns are not worn to be admired, but to be carried with responsibility. And as you inhale and steady yourself, God says this is the moment where hesitation tries one last time to speak, where old voices try to remind you of who you used to be, where doubt tries to whisper that you should wait a little longer, but this is the moment where faith answers back and says, I have waited long. Enough. I have grown enough. I have learned enough. And I trust the one who opened the door more than the fear that stands behind me. And as you begin to move, as the door starts to open wider, as light spills into places that were once hidden, God says, remember that queens do not look back at doors they were finally brave enough to walk through. They keep their eyes forward, their spirit alane, their heart guarded, and their steps measured. Because what comes next will require not just courage, but consistency, not just belief, but obedience, not just confidence, but communion. And this is where your walk truly begins. This is where your yes becomes visible. This is where your faith starts to speak in rooms you have never entered before. This is where your voice carries differently, T. His is where your presence shifts atmospheres. And as you cross the threshold fully, as the door moves from open to behind you, God says, do not rush to define what this season will look like. Let me unfold it step by step, moment by moment, decision by decision, because queens don't need to see the entire path to walk it. They only need to trust the one who placed the crown on their journey. And you take another step forward into what feels unfamiliar, yet strangely aligned. God says this is where you will learn how to balance strength with surrender, how to lead without losing your tenderness, how to stand in rooms of power without forgetting the prayer closet that shaped you. And as the sound of the door closing softly behind you echoes, not as an ending, but as a separation from what no longer serves you, God says, breathe. Because everything ahead will require you to stay present, to stay listening, to stay rooted, and to remember that the same God who opened the door will walk with you through every room beyond it, guiding your decisions, sharpening your discernment, correcting you when necessary, affirming you when doubt tries to return, and reminding you again and again that you are not here by accident. You are here by design. And what unfolds next will demand your full attention, your full faith, and your willingness to keep moving even when the path curves in ways you did not anticipate. Because this is not the end of your becoming. This is the beginning of your reign, unfolding one obedient step at a time. God says, keep walking, because what you are stepping into cannot be grasped by stopping to analyze every detail. Queens move with awareness, not anxiety. And as you move forward, God says you will notice how your surroundings feel different, how the air carries a weight you are not used to, how conversations suddenly require more wisdom than words. This is because you are no longer being positioned, you are being trusted. And trust from heaven is not lig. HT, it is sacred. It requires you to stay sensitive even while becoming stronger, to stay teachable even while being elevated, to stay prayerful even when results start to show up quickly. God says there will be moments ahead where you will be tempted to return to familiar patterns, not because they are good, but because they are comfortable. Familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar promise. But queens do not retreat to old rooms just because the new one feels bigger. God says resist the urge to self-sabotage when things start aligning faster than you expected. You prayed for growth, but growth stretches. You asked for expansion, but expansion demands space. And space requires letting go. God says, I know you sometimes miss the version of yourself that didn't carry so much responsible. Diddy, the one who could be smaller, quieter, less seen, but that version of you was never meant to stay. She was a season, not a destination. And honoring her does not mean returning to her. God says you can appreciate who you were without abandoning who you are becoming. God says as you walk deeper, you will encounter doors within doors. Some will open quickly, others will test your patience. Some will affirm your calling. Others will challenge your character, but every door will reveal something about you. Queens are refined not just by what they achieve, but by how they respond when achievement requires sacrifice. God says you will begin to see how people react differently to you now. Some will be inspired. Some will feel intimidated. Some will attempt to compete where there is no competition. Do not take any of it personally. Queens do not absorb projections, they observe them. God says stay focused on assignment, not reaction. God says there will be moments where you feel the weight of loneliness again, but this loneliness will be different. It will not come from rejection, it will come from separation. Elevation separates. Purpose narrows. And while this can feel isolating, it is also protective. God says, I am reducing noise so you can hear me clearly in the next decisions you must make. God says, remember, not everyone who claps for you deserves access to you. Some people applaud what you carry, not who you are. Discernment will be your guardrail in this season. Queens do not mistake attention for alignment. God says, protect your heart, protect your time, protect your energy, because what you are carrying now is valuable. God says you are entering a season where your obedience will be tested in subtle ways. You will be tempted to compromise just a little, to adjust your standards just enough to fit in, to stay silent when your voice is needed. But queens do not negotiate their values to maintain comfort. God says what I am building through you requires gritty at every level. God says there will be times where you wish someone could walk this path with you the way you imagine, but understand this, some people are called to walk with you, others are called to watch you walk. Both serve a purpose. God says, do not despise either role. Stay grateful without becoming dependent. God says you will start recognizing how much you have grown when situations that once triggered you no longer have the same power. You will notice how silence becomes your response instead of reaction, how prayer replaces panic, how discernment replaces explanation. This is maturity. This is evidence that the crown fits. God says there will be days ahead where you feel tired in a way rest does not immediately fix. This is not burnout, this is expansion. New capacity requires adjustment. Give yourself grace as you grow into what you are carrying. Queens rest strategically, not guiltily. God says learn to pause without quitting. God says as your influence increases, your words will matter more than ever. Speak carefully, speak truthfully, speak with compassion. You will be heard even when you are not trying to be loud. God says, I am teaching you how to lead presence, not performance. God says, do not rush intimacy with me in this season. Success can make prayer feel optional if you are not careful. But queens know their power source. Stay connected, stay grounded, stay listening. God says the moment you stop seeking me is the moment you start leaning on yourself, and that is not how this story unfolds. God says there will be confirmations along way, moments where you realize this is exactly where you are supposed to be. But there will also be challenges that make you question yourself. Both are part of the process. Queens do not let doubt define direction. They let calling anchor them. God says you will outgrow certain conversations, certain habits, certain desires. What once satisfied you will no longer be enough. Do not mourn this. Too long. It is a sign of growth. Queens have different appetites. God says feed yourself with what strengthens you, not what distracts you. God says you will be asked to make decisions without full clarity sometimes. This is where trust comes in. Faith is not always knowing the outcome, it is knowing who walks with you into it. God says, step anyway. I will correct your course if needed, but I cannot steer a stationary heart. God says, as you continue, you will notice how your prayers change. You will pray less about survival and more about stewardship, less about rescue and more about wisdom, less about being chosen and more about being faithful. This is the prayer life of a queen. God says there will be moments where old wounds try to resurface, especially when new levels expose old SCRs. Do not panic. Healing is not linear. Queens revisit healed places with new understanding, not new pain. God says, I'm showing you how far you have come. God says you will be entrusted with people with influence, with opportunities that require humility to handle well. Remember, authority is not proven by control, but by service. Queens lift others without losing themselves. God says, led why? Stay strength, but also with grace. God says you are allowed to enjoy this season. You are allowed to smile without guilt. You are allowed to celebrate progress without fear of jinxing it. Joy is not arrogance. Gratitude keeps you grounded. God says, rejoice without forgetting me. God says, as you walk further, you will sense when a door is not yours, even if it looks attractive. Trust that, discern me. Every open door is not a divine door. Queens do not chase opportunities, they respond to assignments. God says, let peace be your confirmation. God says you will begin to understand why certain prayers were delayed. Timing protected you. If you had received some things earlier, they would have broken you instead of blessing you. God says, I was not withholding, I was preparing. God says there will be moments where you feel the urge to explain yourself, to defend your decisions, to justify your growth. Resist that urge. Queens do not live on trial. Your fruit will speak louder than your explanations. God says, let results answer questions. God says you are stepping into a rhythm where obedience will need to be daily, not occasional. Small decisions will matter. Quiet moments will matter. Consistency will matter. Queens are built in what they do repeatedly, not occasionally. God says as you continue, you will feel a deeper responsibility to guard your inner life. What you allow in will shape what flows out. Be mindful of what you watch, what you listen to, what you entertain. God says protect your atmosphere. God says there will be seasons of acceleration ahead where things move, eat quickly, and seasons of stillness where things slow down again. Do not mistake stillness for stagnation. Sometimes I slow you down to deepen you. Queens grow roots before they bear visible fruit. God says you will become more comfortable with not being understood. Peace will matter more than popularity. Alignment will matter more than approval. God says this is freedom. God says you are learning how to walk without needing applause, how to serve without being seen, how to give without keeping score. This is royalty language. This is kingdom posture. God says, as you move, remember to check in with your heart. Ask yourself why you are doing what you are doing. Queens lead from a pure place, not a proving place. God says you have nothing left to prove. God says there will be moments where you feel stretched between who you are called to serve and who you need to become. Balance will be important. Do not neglect yourself in the name of responsibility. Queens steward themselves well. God says, I am teaching you how to hear my voice above all others. The more you listen, the clearer it will become. The clearer it becomes, the easier it will be to move without fear. God says, trust He quiet nudges. They matter. God says, as you continue walking, you will start seeing how everything connects, how the pain made sense, how the waiting had purpose, how the doors that closed redirected you. Understanding will come in layers. Do not rush revelation. God says you are entering a season where your testimony will shift from what you survived to what you are building. This is Legacy L. Anguish. Queens think generationally. God says what you do now will impact more than just you. God says there will be moments where you feel the weight of expectation, both from others and from yourself. Release perfection. Excellence is not perfection, it is faithfulness. God says, do your best and let me do the rest. God says, as you keep walking, notice how your confidence is quieter now, steadier, less reactive. This is not insecurity, this is assurance. Queens do not need to announce their strength. They embody it. God says you will encounter challenges that test your patience more than your faith. Waiting will still be part of your journey, but now you wait differently. You wait with understanding, you why. T with hope. You wait with trust. God says, stay alert, stay humble, stay obedient. What unfolds next will require your attention, your wisdom, your softness, and your strength, because the path ahead is still unfolding, and every step you take continues to shape the queen you are becoming. Every decision continues to refine your authority. Every moment continues to invite you deeper into alignment with what I'm doing through your life. As you move forward, breathing steadily, heart anchored, spirit attentive, God says, remember that this journey is not about rushing to an end. It is about walking faithfully through each moment, allowing me to guide you through every turn, every challenge, every opportunity that awaits just beyond where you are now. God says, keep your pace steady, Beck. Oz, this journey is not measured by how fast you arrive, but by how deeply you remain aligned while you move. Queens understand timing. They know when to advance and when to pause, when to speak and when to listen, when to hold on and when to release. And God says you are learning this rhythm now, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when your flesh wants immediate answers. The wisdom you are G. Aiming in this season will protect you in seasons where decisions carry greater weight. God says you are stepping into spaces where your presence will challenge systems without you saying a word. Your integrity will expose shortcuts. Your consistency will reveal excuses. Your discipline will highlight compromise. And this will not always make you popular, but it will make you effective. Queens AR. Not called to be agreeable, they are called to be aligned. God says do not shrink when resistance rises. Resistance is often proof that you are disrupting something that needed to be challenged. God says there will be moments when you realize you can no longer pour from the same places you used to. Some wells have run dry, not because you failed, but because you have grown. Queens do not force in nourishment from empty sources. God says, seek fresh water, seek fresh wisdom, seek environments that stretch you without draining you. God says, I am sharpening your discernment so that you recognize the difference between opportunity and assignment. Opportunity excites the flesh. Assignment settles the spirit. Queens choose what aligns, not what dazzles. God says, trust the quiet yes in your spirit, more than loud external affirmation. God says you will notice that your standards are higher now, not because you are demanding, but because you are aware. Awareness changes tolerance. You can no longer pretend not to see what you see. Queens do not lower standards to avoid loneliness. God says, I will meet you at the level of your obedience. God says there will be moments where you feel the PR. Assure of expectation, where people assume you have all the answers. Remember, you are still human. Queens ask for wisdom. Queens seek counsel. Queens know when to lean on me instead of carrying everything alone. God says humility will keep you grounded when responsibility increases. God says you are entering a season where your voice will carry authority even in rooms you once felt invisible in. But authority does not require volume. Speak when led, be silent when instructed. Queens understand that silence can be strategic. God says not every truth needs to be spoken immediately. Some truths need timing. God says, watch how you respond when things go right. Success reveals character just as much as struggle. Gratitude will keep you soft. Pride will harden you. Queens, stay thankful. God say, remember the days you prayed for what you now steward. God says you will experience moments of clarity followed by moments of uncertainty. This does not mean you are off track. Faith often alternates between confidence and dependence. Queens are not shaken by questions. They are anchored by trust. God says, lean into me when clarity fades. God says there will be times when old voices resurface, reminding you of past mistakes, past failures, past identities. Do not entertain them. Those voices do not have jurisdiction here. Queens do not negotiate with their past. God says your history informs you, but it does not define you. God says you will be required to make peace with being misunderstood. Some will only know the version of you that benefited them. Others will only remember the SE, ASIN, where you were still becoming. Queens do not try to rewrite narratives. God says, let truth unfold over time. God says there will be opportunities to prove yourself, but proving is not the same as purpose. You do not need to perform to be valued. Queens are secure in who they are becoming. God says move from identity, not insecurity. God says you will start recognizing patterns more quickly. Now, in people, in situations, in yourself. This awareness is not for judgment, it is for wisdom. Queens observe before they engage. God says discernment will save you time, energy, and unnecessary battles. God says you are learning how to sit at tables without losing yourself. You no longer feel the need to impress. You no longer feel the need to compete. You belong. Queens carry belonging internally, not externally. God says your confidence is rooted now, not reactive. God says there will be moments when you feel stretched emotionally, spiritually, mentally. Stretching is uncomfortable, but it increases capacity. Queens expand without breaking. God says, listen to your limits, rest when needed, refill intentionally. God says you will find yourself praying more specific prayers now. Not desperate prayers, but discerning ones. Not emotional prayers, but intentional ones. This is maturity. Queens pray with vision. God says your prayers are shaping environments you have not even entered yet. God says there will be moments when you are tempted to settle because you are tired of waiting. Do not settle. Settling delays alignment. Queens wait with purpose. God says what is meant for you will require patience, but it will not require compromise. God says you will notice how peace becomes your priority. Chaos no longer excites you. Drama no longer entertains you. This is growth. Queens protect peace because peace protects clarity. God says, let peace lead you. God says there will be assignments ahead that stretch your compassion. You will be called to lead people who do not look like you, think like you, or move like you. Queens lead inclusively without losing conviction. God says love deeply without losing boundaries. God says you are learning how to separate emotion from decision. Feelings inform, but they do not rule. Queens feel fully, but they decide wisely. God says wisdom will guide you where emotion cannot. God says there will be moments when you realize you no longer fit in certain spaces. This is not rejection, this is redirection. Queens do not force fit where growth has moved them beyond. God says honor the season and keep moving. God says you are stepping into a phase where your consistency will matter more than your intensity. Anyone can be intense for a moment. Queens are steady over time. God says keep showing up. Keep praying, keep obeying. God says you will be tested in private before you are celebrated in public. Integrity is built when no one is watching. Queens are the same in secret as they are on display. God says what you do when unseen matters deeply. God says there will be moments when you feel overwhelmed by responsibility. Bring it to me. You were never meant to carry this alone. Queens delegate. Burdens upward. God says release control and trust my guidance. God says you will find joy in simpler things now. Quiet mornings, clear decisions, honest conversations. This is alignment. Queens find contentment without complacency. God says enjoy the journey without losing focus. God says as you keep walking, you will recognize how far you have come, not by what you have gained, but by what no longer controls you. Fear no longer dictates. Approval no longer dominates. Comparison no longer distracts. This is freedom. God says there will be seasons when your faith feels strong and seasons when it feels quiet. Faith does not disappear in quiet, it deepens. Queens trust even when emotion is absent. God says stay faithful. God says you are becoming more selective with your words. You know low. Anger speak to fill silence. You speak to bring clarity. Queens understand the power of language. God says your words are seeds now. Plant carefully. God says you will notice how alignment brings acceleration. Things that once took years may now take months. Be ready. Stay prepared. Queens, remain ready even while resting. God says stay attentive. God says there will be opportunities to mentor, to guide, to influence quietly. Do not underestimate these moments. Queens build legacy through everyday obedience. God says impact is not always loud. God says you are learning how to celebrate without comparison. Others' success no longer threatens you. This is confidence. Queens cheer authentically. God says your time is secure. God says there will be moments when you feel called to step out in faith again, even after reaching new levels. Growth does not stop at arrival. Queens keep becoming. God says remain teachable. God says you are developing discernment about when to fight and when to walk away. Not every battle is yours. Queens conserve energy for what matters. God says choose wisely. God says you will feel an ink, increasing responsibility to steward your inner life well. Your thoughts, your motives, your desires. Queens guard the heart. God says what flows from you will shape others. God says as you move forward, you will sense when something is misaligned before it becomes obvious. Trust that intuition. It is refined discernment. Queens, listen to inner warnings. God says heed them. God says you are becoming comfortable with complexity. Life is no longer black and white. Wisdom sees layers. Queens navigate nuance without losing truth. God says walk carefully. God says there will be days when obedience feels ordinary. Do not underestimate ordinary obedience. Queens are built in daily faithfulness. God says consistency is powerful. God says you will find that your presence calms rooms now. Your energy steadies others. This is leadership. Queens lead by being. God says remain centered. God says as you continue, you will notice how your identity is no longer tied to outcomes. Win or lose, you remain grounded. This is security. Queens are anchored internally. God says stay rooted. God says you are learning how to trust my timing even when it differs from your expectations. Timing is protectio, and queens honor timing. God says wait when instructed, move when led. God says there will be moments where the path ahead feels unclear, but your next step feels sure. Take the step. Queens move one step at a time. God says light follows obedience. God says as you keep walking, your understanding will deepen, your confidence will steady, your discernment will sharpen, and your dependence on me, it'll grow even as your influence expands, because what lies ahead will continue to unfold in layers, requiring your attention, your humility, your courage, and your willingness to remain present in each moment, listening closely, moving faithfully, staying aligned, allowing me to guide you through every decision, every challenge, every opportunity that continues to rise before you as this journey keeps opening further and further into what I am shaping through your life. God says as you stand here now, having walked through what once felt impossible, take a moment to recognize the quiet strength that is formed within you. This journey was never about arriving quickly, being seen loudly, or proving your worth to the world. It was about becoming anchored, refined, and aligned with who you were always created to be. The door I opened for you was not just an entrance into new opportunities, but an invitation into deeper trust, greater responsibility, and a fuller expression of your purpose. Walk forward knowing you are not alone, knowing every step is guided, knowing your obedience has meaning even when no one is watching. Carry your crown with humility, your heart with compassion, and your faith with courage. Remain attentive, remain faithful, remain surrendered, because what I am unfolding through your life will continue to reveal itself in seasons, shaping not only your future, but the lives you are called to touch. And as you move ahead with steady confidence and a softened heart, remember that I am with you in every room, every decision, and every step beyond this moment, leading you not just into blessing, but into legacy.